Thanks very much, Murray. Now, we're going to take some questions. We've got about half an hour before we run into problems, but if anybody got any questions, please approach a microphone, and given the lights in my eyes, you might have to wave a little bit for me to see what it's on about. I might just kick off by asking Neil, you mentioned that you'd been studying the cost of government regulation imposts. I was wondering if you could explore that a little bit further and tell us about whether that includes things such as the cost of getting new herbicides registered, the costs of GM moratoriums, those sorts of costs as well.
ABARES undertook some survey work at the end of last year, publishing a report where we went out and surveyed some industry participants, asking them what the major impediments that they came across. Those results have been published recently, and we're going on from that and working with within the department policy areas to come up with the responses to that, and if they are economically viable and how much of a benefit the reduction of those impediments cost or will save. Regarding herbicide registration, not exactly sure about on that one, but I can definitely put you in touch with someone that can help.
Did I see someone? No. Joe, one of the things that really struck me about the graphs that you were using was that consumption seemed to be in lockstep with production, that we've got record productions, but we've also got record consumptions, which is very good if you've got record production, not to see the price crash through stockpiles being built up. But it also begs the question, what's going to be the next quantum step in grain prices that's going to see the profitability of farmers improve significantly if that's the case?
Well, you're right, and this is it's an issue that we talk a lot about. I mean, you look at, and I think someone showed this chart earlier this morning of just the long run decline in prices due to productivity gains, and that all sort of reversed around 2000 between 2000 and 2005, where prices took off again. And some of that obviously due to things like biofuel production. But then, you look at things like soybeans, you look at things like feed grain consumption. Those drivers have been moving, growing at rates that are outpacing productivity gains. That has, changed again, although again, I don't see us falling back to that long-term curve downward. I think we'll see fairly flat prices, at least in real terms. That is, demand will keep up with supply. But remember that the real critical thing here is supply is a lot more variable than demand, and so generally, and so I think as long as stocks remain fairly tight like they are, that you could see some volatility, and I think that's one implication to draw from that. Over the longer term, if you do have stock rebuilding, then I think you could see, a lot less volatility, and it could absorb, year to year a production shortfall.
Thanks, Joe. Mike 3.
Yes. Hello, Richard Dickman, Bayer Crop Science. A question for Murray. Thanks very much for your very clear explanation of the need for weed resistance management and how it should be done. I mean, earlier today, I think there was a discussion that one of our productivity challenges is the actual growing gap between what farmers at the top end of production are doing and some of the other farmers. Do you have a perception for how these ideas are being adopted, in particular in the eastern part of Australia, and how they might, more rapidly be encouraged and adopted?
That's a really good question, Richard. There is an issue with growers taking up new techniques. The last decade, with the season of multiple years of drought and then several years of flood and then a frost, have made a lot of people very cautious. And so it is a challenge, and I know GRDC does a lot of work in extension, because I think that's probably part of the other thing that often gets dropped off with RD&E is that it's all very good and well to do the research and development, but if there's no one there to tell the growers how to do it, it's not going to happen. And so, and I know companies like Bayer and Syngenta have been very responsible corporate citizens by trying to get growers to do the right thing and use herbicides responsibly. But it is an ongoing challenge because people in my part of the world their fingers have been burnt over the last few years. And so, but we are also seeing that drift between the uptake by the more progressive farmers tend to embrace things very quickly and run with it and do very well with it. And there's always going to be a percentage of farmers, I believe, that for whatever reason just are not going to take new technologies up.
Thanks, Murray. Yes, microphone 3 again, yes.
Same mic. And I suppose my question, Catherine Tarrant from Rural Finance in Victoria, and my question follows on from the previous one, particularly about intergenerational farming, and when the son or daughter comes home after doing ag science or coming to a conference like this and has all these great ideas and goes, Dad, I want to do this, I'm going to revolutionise the world. How do you start that conversation with someone who really doesn't want to change? And how did it work in your situation, I suppose?
I'm pretty fortunate that I had a father and a grandfather that were very progressive, and a grandfather that was always a great believer in, and it's just good business practice, of try something small, see how it goes, and if it works all right, we'll try a bit bigger. And it can be a bit difficult with intergenerational, but I think it's a challenge for... I'm not really sure about how you do it because I've been fortunate. Like, having said that, I still have plenty of arguments with my father, and officially he's now retired and I'm the manager, but that's only until I make a decision he doesn't like. But I think it's just one of those things that, try something in a small way, and, a responsible business doesn't bet the farm on a new technology or a new technique. So, that's all I can say, sorry.
Thanks, Murray. Mark Swift.
Thanks, Richard. Question for Murray, and probably also one for Neil. Can be answered in a couple of different ways, I guess. Murray, how much do you think our productivity is being limited by tools we can't have access to and the experience we would gain in learning how to better utilise those tools? And as a follow-on, how much of our productivity, or how much are we limiting our productivity because our cost of freight to get to port pushes us so much further down the marginal cost improvement when it's $100 a tonne to get the header out to get it fobbed, if we're talking a tonne of grain, versus if it was $50.
Yeah, Mark, I think you're right about technology limitations. I've got 3 towns within 10 kilometres of my house, and yet the maximum internet access I've got is 15 gigabytes a month. I've got 4 iPhones on that, 4 iPads. So when Apple do an update, half my download just goes like that. And so that's a really big limitation because I'd love to be using the internet to have my machines talk to each other, have real-time downloads of weather stations. The technology's there to monitor cattle, and all of those things just aren't available to me, and for the foreseeable future won't be. And when we bought GPS technology 15 years ago, we didn't think we'd be using it to do inter-row sowing or variable rate lime or whatever. We were just buying it because we wanted to steer the tractor. And so I think that's the great thing that's holding agriculture back, is that lack of technological internet infrastructure. And, those extra costs that come outside the farm, like freight, like grain handling, the freight for inputs back, that's another issue. All of those things are eating into our bottom line. So, if I could cut $20 off my bottom line. That adds 10% to my income, just like that, 10% to my profit. So, which then lets you do that sort of funding to take up that technology, because it's not cheap, some of this stuff.
Yeah, just on the technological limitations, I think it's really interesting what Murray just said. Yes, there are definitely limitations in what's available, but what is available is being used in those innovative ways, and it's not until you get that sort of technology on farm to steer tractors before you realise that you can use it for several other purposes. And I think that's a great characteristic of Australian farmers, is that they do well with what they actually have. And if we could get better internet access for Murray and people like him, then the possibilities are a lot greater. On the cost of transport, I guess it's not going to be what you want to hear, but the cost of transport's always been an issue in Australia. We are quite a long way away from ports, our main growing areas in some places. So I think that the gains that can be made on transport are probably a little bit less than. I think the marginal difference in grains transport is probably rather small.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, if there's no other questions, ladies and gentlemen, I'll call this session to a close. I thank you very much for your attendance, and would you please join me in thanking our speakers for their papers today.